Welcome everyone to Warlock Sanctum's Games Character Creation Forge. I am the host, Matthew Pauze, also known as OniWolf2000 Online, and today I am going to be the student for Dungeons & Dragons BX. I have with me today Josh. Did you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Josh Irvin. I am Ironic Hero Games at StartPlaying Games, and I mostly focus on indie games like Dungeon World, Monster of the Week, things like that, although I am now expanding out into 5th edition D&D, and I also offer the game that we are making a character for today, which is Dungeons & Dragons BX. The BX stands for Basic Expert Set. It's the 1981 Basic Edition of Dungeons & Dragons.
Alright, so a quick time jump back. Haven't seen this kind
Far,
of system
far
in a
back.
long time.
Yes, many, many years. I believe I was 3 years old when this came out.
Oh, wow. Alright, so we're not going to bore anyone. We're going to get into this really quick.
Right.
So, tell me about this. Where do we start when we're building the basic edition?
Well, this is probably going to be a little bit different than people who are more familiar with newer editions are used to, because the first thing you do is roll your ability scores. If you're used to the standard array, that is not how things were done back in the day. You took 3 six-sided dice, you rolled them in order, and that determined what kind of character you ended up playing. So you'll note the order is a little bit different also than our modern versions. It starts with strength, intelligence, wisdom, dexterity, constitution, and charisma. So why don't you go ahead and give me a roll and we'll see what we get.
Alright, so just to clarify, the way I roll them is how I track them as well, right?
Yes,
So,
3d6 and write them down.
Alright, so we have 11 to begin.
All right. And you'll note they have the same range as modern D&D, 3 to 18. That's actually where we get our range, is rolling the dice. Go ahead and fill those in.
Mm-hmm. Working on it. So we have an 11, a 10, a 10, a 12, a 13. Not doing too bad.
No,
And
that's a
a
plus 1
5.
bonus. Oh,
Jinx
that will
myself
happen.
there.
All right. Another thing that is different than you might be used to in the modern editions is the actual bonuses that apply to each number are different. As opposed to going up by 1 every 2 numbers, it's actually 9 through 12 is a plus 0.
All right.
13, 14, and 15 is a plus 1. 16 and 17 is a plus 2. And 18 is a plus 3. So a 5 is going to be a minus 2, 4, and 5. So, and that's actually a pretty average roll right there. You end up getting a lot of zeros because it's pretty rare for anyone to end up getting anything like a 16, 17, or 18. Or a 3, 4, or 5, but you managed to get 5. So congratulations.
So, we're not going to get too much into the system, but I just want to ask, for the feel of this game, are we starting out as, established adventurers? Or are we a farmer who got bored, picked up a sword, and is hoping for the best?
EX is very, very zero to hero. If you're a fighter, you are literally a guy who just picked up a sword. A wizard is an apprentice who has his first spell. A cleric probably is an acolyte who literally just got his robes or his holy symbol. So yeah, you are very, very, very unskilled in what you're going to be doing.
All right.
So yeah, if you look up there at the top, you got your name. Got your alignment, which is also different than modern versions.
Okay.
In Basic Expert, alignment only came in 3 types. You were either lawful, neutral, or chaotic. There was no good or evil back then, just lawful and chaotic, and the neutral between.
Okay.
Although most people who played back then kind of just made chaotic evil, and lawful pretty much just meant good-ish. So we got our bonuses. The next thing we need to do is pick a class. So looking at that, your only better than average score is Constitution, and that's pretty much good for anything, although it's going to be helpful for someone on the front line. So either a fighter, or a cleric, which brings us to class. There are only 7 classes in this edition. There
All
is
right.
fighter, well, in alphabetical order, there's cleric, fighter, thief, magic user. I guess that's not alphabetical order. Thinking of it as a wizard, but they were actually called magic users back then.
Mm-hmm.
And the other 3 classes are dwarf, elf, and halfling.
Oh, that's going
Back then,
back.
yes, races were classes. If you were an elf, you were not an elf wizard, you were not an elf fighter, you were just an elf. You were just a halfling. Elves were basically fighter mages. Dwarves were basically fighters with a few different abilities, and halflings were kind of close to a fighter thief. They had some hiding abilities, but were a little bit better at fighting than your average thief.
Now,
So,
I just have a quick
yes,
question. Do any of these have requirements to take these classes, or is it just...
yes, they do. As far as, and I've got my books right here, I'd also like to point out I'm not going from the original BX books because those are long out of print. I'm using a retro clone called Old School Essentials, which is all the exact same rules, just reprinted in a much easier to read format, and that's from Necrotic Gnome Games.
Mm-hmm.
We'll probably put a link to that. So as far as having requirements, the only ones that have big requirements are the 3 demi-human classes.
All right.
Halfling has to have a constitution of 9 and a dexterity of 9. A elf has to have an intelligence of 9, and a dwarf has to have a constitution of 9. I guess there are no requirements for cleric, there are no requirements for fighter, and there are no requirements for magic user or thief, although they do have prime requisites. Really, the only thing having a high intelligence helps with being a magic user is if you have high enough, you get a percentage bonus when you get XP, but it actually doesn't affect your spellcasting at all. You can be an intelligence 3 wizard, and you end up casting spells literally just as well as an intelligence 18 wizard. You just advance slower.
All right. Well, hearing those options, I think I will go with dwarf.
Cool. So we will look in dwarf, and the next thing we need to do is go ahead and let me actually look at I have the page marked with the actual steps of character creation, so make sure we're not missing anything. We rolled your ability scores. We chose a class. You actually have the option to adjust your ability scores.
Okay.
You can raise your prime requisite by lowering other scores. For every 2 points you lower one of your other scores, you may raise your prime requisite by 1. Only strength, intelligence, and wisdom can be lowered this way. No score can be lowered below 9, and some classes have additional constraints. So let's look at the dwarf and see if there are any restraints on dwarf. It does not seem to have any of those. So yeah, your prime requisite is strength. So if you wanted to lower your intelligence or wisdom by 2 points, well, you couldn't because they can't go past 9.
Yeah, so
you're stuck with what you have. Yeah,
I'm okay with that.
Awesome.
All right, so what's the next
So we have
step?
dwarf. The next step is to, I believe, roll your hit dice. And as a dwarf, you will have 1d8 for your hit die.
All right, let's roll this. 5. So is it
And make sure straight 5 plus your 1 from Constitution.
All right.
Actually, so you have 6 hit points, which is actually pretty high for a starting character. And this edition, you often see fighters with 2 hit points sometimes.
Ouch.
And 1d8 is actually the highest hit die there is. Fighters have 1d8. Nobody has 1d10 or 1d12 in this game.
That's also a big change from modern D&D.
Yes. It was very, very common to have your first 4 or 5 characters die before they reach second level. Once you got to second level, obviously your survivability doubled because you had an entire other hit die of hit points to deal with. But yeah, most characters went down with 1 hit. Right. Next step is to note your attack values, which will bring us to another very different or big difference between what you're used to. Down at the bottom, you'll see 2 hit roll on that first page.
All right.
And actually have these memorized. The way things used to work back then was instead of rolling a d20 and adding your bonus, you rolled a d20 and consulted a chart based on your class. However, at first level, everyone used the exact same chart. It wasn't until fourth level that fighters and dwarves went up a little bit. So underneath 9, you'll write a 10, and then 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, all the way to 19. People familiar with new editions will also note that it's harder to hit an AC that is lower. ACs started at 9 and went down. So 0 was the best armor class you could have. And although there were some monsters that had -1, -2, -3, but if you had full armor and a shield, you were rocking a 0 armor class.
Okay, so just for example, was armor broken down like it is nowadays, where you have full plate and chainmail and stuff like that, or was it just a couple choices?
There were actually only 3 choices. You had leather, you had chainmail, and you had plate mail. And then a shield gave you a +1 bonus. And actually, I'm wrong about that. 0 was not your AC for plate mail and a shield. Plate mail gave you a 16. A shield gave you a 1, so you actually had a 17 AC. But another difference is your dexterity bonus always added to your AC.
Did you say a 17 AC? I thought it counted down.
Sorry, I'm thinking in modern terms. It's a 2 AC.
All right, thank you.
One thing a lot of people who run this edition do is switch it back to ascending AC. So if you look down there, it actually works out a 9 AC, and BX is the equivalent of a modern 10 AC. 8 is an 11, a 7 is a 12. It literally is those numbers you wrote down. But it wasn't until a decade later that someone realized.
For the audience sake, we'll just try and stick to the rules for this character. We can get into more detail of how people switch it at the end.
Yeah, cool. So those are your 2 hit numbers. You also need to figure out your saving throws.
Okay.
Which, if you look over on the right, your dwarf saving throws for poison and death ray is an 8. Your magic wand is a 9. Your turn to stone or paralysis is a 10. Your dragon breath is a 13. And your spells are a 12. And these are numbers that you would try to roll over on a d20. They were your target numbers.
Basically. So lower, like your AC lowers better.
Yes. You start at a high number. By the time you get to like 14th level, you would have 2s and 3s and 4s.
Oh, okay.
So it's a lot easier to save. So the next step, let's see, did our saving throws, we did our hit points, we did our attack bonus, alignment, we did that. What did you choose as an alignment?
We'll go with lawful for the dwarf. Does it have any mechanical effects in the game?
Only when it comes to magic. There was a protection from evil spell and a no alignment spell. So people could determine your alignment. You also had something called alignment languages back then. So all lawful characters had a language they were able to speak called lawful. Really? All chaotic characters had it. Yeah. And I think those translate to our modern celestial and abyssal and infernal, the idea that it's sort of like a religious language. Lawful characters could all speak to each other in this lawful language, which was a strange setting of it. And then our next thing is to choose our special abilities. So as a dwarf, let's look that guy up. The first thing I know you have is detect construction tricks. And you can just write those down. Yeah. Construction tricks. Basically, it says, as an expert miner, dwarves have a 2 in 6 chance of being able to detect new construction, sliding walls, sloping passages, or other things while searching. So what you would roll is a 1d6, and if you got a 1 or a 2, you could detect those things. There's probably not enough room to write the entire thing out. You might just write 2/6 construction tricks.
We'll just
you also had
the name of the abilities for now.
You also had detect room traps, which was also a 2 in 6 chance. And room traps. This edition divided traps into item traps, like if you were opening a treasure chest, and room traps, which would be things like stuff falling from the ceiling, pit traps, things like that. You also have infravision of 60 feet. And a 2 in 6 chance of hearing at doors. And that is literally the extent of your powers as a dwarf. Although we also need to note your languages, which I think is on your second page.
All right. We have other notes, skills, memorize spells, thief abilities. Is there skills beyond what we've got with the special abilities?
No. Thieves had skills, which were percentile based, but and later on in not basic expert, but what came later, which was basic expert companion master, they did introduce secondary skills. But in this version of the game, there are no skills. You just have your languages, which are common,
Yeah.
dwarvish, gnomish.
All right.
Goblin.
Quite a few.
And kobold. Yes. That was one of the neat things from getting a demi-human class is you got extra languages. Things like clerics and fighters, they could just speak common. However, if you have a high enough intelligence, you also got bonus languages.
Interesting.
But dwarves get to start out with all sorts of fun things. And that, other than buying your equipment, is all you have left to do. And that actually determines your armor class. So to buy equipment, you actually had to roll another 3d6.
Okay.
And multiply that by 10, and that would be how many gold pieces you got.
So our character today is going to have... We got an 11, so that's 110, right?
Yes.
Was there set packages of starting equipment, or was it all pick and buy?
No, they just had a big list of equipment. However, the list was actually pretty short. It was some weapons and about 20 different things you could buy in gear. Probably don't want to bore the viewers with going through every single gear choice, but do you want to go ahead and buy your weapons and armor?
That sounds good. We'll get...
So what kind of weapon?
He's a dwarf, so let's figure some kind of hammer. What options would there be?
Well, hammer was basically just confined to the warhammer.
Right.
So that would cost 5 gold pieces.
All right.
And it would do 1d6 damage.
So we have our warhammer for 1d6 damage. And that's going to bring our money down by
And
5.
Mm-hmm. Any other weapons you would like to have?
I think that's a good start. What about armor? You said there was only 3 types of
armor.
Go ahead.
Your options are leather, chainmail, plate mail, and a shield. Note, we didn't go over proficiencies, but dwarves are able to use any armor and any weapon that isn't two-handed. Warhammer is just one-handed in this edition.
Okay, so they can't use two-handed weapons. Can the fighter use two-handed weapons? Just curious.
Yes, that was the one thing that made the fighter better than the dwarf. They shared the same hit points, or the same hit dice, and the same attack bonuses. But dwarves actually have much better saving throws.
All right.
That was their big advantage. So yeah, you can probably afford plate mail since it is 60 gold pieces.
All right, then we will throw this on our dwarf, and that will help determine his AC, correct?
Yes. And would you like a shield as well for 10 extra gold pieces?
That sounds good. Hire himself out as, the bodyguard for his short life.
So, yes. So the plate mail would give you an AC of 3, and then -1 from your shield, which means you have an AC of 2.
All right.
And then whatever other money you have left, you can either keep or you can invest in things like a backpack, crowbar, garlic for vampires, flask of oil, 10-foot pole, torches, wine, wolfsbane, stakes and a mallet, also for vampires, and then various ropes, sacks, rations, iron spikes, grappling hook, things like that.
All right, so moving past that, the equipment stuff, because we won't get too deep into that, because that can take
Yes.
a while normally creating characters.
Yes.
I'm seeing an age, height, weight, eye color, hair color. Is any of that generated, or is that just picked?
No, those are just picked.
All right,
I don't think it
just
was until advanced D&D when they gave you all sorts of charts to roll to see your height and your hair color. But back then it was just your choice.
all right.
Um, as, and then the final thing I think we need to figure out is your experience points, because one
Okay,
thing that was different than earlier editions is every single class used different experience tables.
okay.
So as a dwarf, let's look that up.
So,
Right now you have obviously 0 hit points because you're first level,
yep, 0 XP.
and you would advance at 2,200 XP.
All right, I see a bonus penalty percentage here. I don't think that
Yes.
applies to this character, but for the audience,
No.
what is that for?
If you had a 16 or higher in your prime requisite, which in your case as a dwarf is strength,
Mm-hmm.
you would get a 10% bonus. So any experience you got at the end of the session, you would add 10%. But you will not be getting that since your strength is not 16.
Absolutely, and it also says penalty. From my understanding, a lot of the classes you had to have a minimum in your prerequisite, right? Or did I get
Yeah,
my
well, I
misremember?
think it works the same. If you had a 5 or 3 in your prime requisite, you would be getting a 10% penalty from that.
Okay, good to know.
But you don't have that either, so you just have a 0% penalty or bonus. And I
So,
think you are ready to go. Like I said, it's a pretty quick way of generating a character. Had you been a cleric, you would have had a turn undead table chart to look at to see what you had to roll to turn undead.
yep.
Had you been a thief, you would have had thief skills. And were you a magic user, you would have had to pick one spell because magic
All right.
users started with one spell.
All right. Well, this has been
You are done.
fantastic. We've built the
Awesome.
character. It has taken us 15 minutes, maybe. Why don't you tell me a
Yeah.
little more about the system itself now? Like, I know we've gone into it a bit, but we had started asking, is this a zero to hero, or is this starting as a competent hero moving forward? Why don't you give us the feel of starting this game?
It is a very, very deadly game. It's pretty different than modern editions, where, like I said, if you start playing, there's a very good chance a first level fighter facing off against a goblin, it's literally a coin toss whether you will live or die. There were some other systems in place to make sure that it wasn't quite as deadly, because you had things like morale, which was a big part of the game. Anytime the first monster went down on the monster side, or more than half were cut down, you rolled for morale, and the monsters would automatically flee. So when you were fighting a group of monsters, the point wasn't to kill them all off. It was to hopefully kill one and watch the others run away. You were also
Okay.
very much encouraged to try to talk to them first. There was a reaction table based on your charisma. So when you met anything intelligent, instead of immediately attacking, the DM would be rolling on a table with 2d6, and that would determine whether or not these monsters were friendly or not. So many times when you met a group of kobolds or an ogre, they were more interested in trading with you or just talking to you or ignoring you than immediately attacking.
Okay. Does this game track things like encumbrance, food supply, stuff like that?
There were actually encumbrance rules were optional, and it was tracked by gold piece. That was the standard of weight. Um, this game, more so than other games, instead of being based on the idea of having fantasy adventures and saving a village from marauding monsters, it was all about the acquisition of wealth and power. Gary Gygax, who created the original edition, and Dave Arneson, they were big fans of Conan and Elric and sword and sorcery fiction, which was usually about going down into dungeons or caverns and fighting a monster and getting rich, rather than saving the innocents or defeating a dark lord.
Mm-hmm.
So all your XP actually came from how many gold pieces you found in your adventure. there was XP for fighting monsters, but it was actually pretty low compared to the XP you would get from finding treasure. So
Okay.
your main point was to get into a dungeon, get treasure, get it out, and do that without getting killed. So finding a monster was generally a bad idea if you could avoid it. There were also random monster checks for wandering monsters. So the longer you spent in the dungeon, the more likely something would come along and attack you. And wandering monsters didn't carry treasure. So it was always a bad idea to try and fight them. You try to run away or hide from them, but sometimes you couldn't avoid it.
Okay. So mechanically looking at the system and the genre it's trying to emulate, what are two things this system does really well in your opinion?
The reason I like this system is it is fast and simple. Um, it's more so than any modern edition, in my opinion. It is easy to get people to understand the rules, even though a lot of the rules are arbitrary and there's no unified mechanic. Roll high for saving throws, you roll low to make an ability check, you're rolling a d6 to kick down a door or to listen, you're rolling percentile dice to pick a lock. There's all sorts of different dice systems, but once you play a session, you pretty much got all the rules under your belt, and there are very few complications. There aren't feats. Uh, Class abilities are very simplistic. If you're a fighter, your class ability is you can use any weapon and any armor. You saw dwarves have those 3 powers. They never get anything else.
Okay.
Magic users get 1 spell basically per level. So it's very easy to learn. It's very easy to throw a character together. Like you said, you just saw it took 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Once you've done it once, it takes closer to 5 minutes.
Fair.
Yeah, it's for me, it's a fast, easy system. You can throw it together. It doesn't take a lot of tactics. It doesn't take a lot of overthinking things. It's just fast, fun, and
Nice.
simple.
Fast, fun, and gritty from the sounds of it. These characters sound like
Yes.
they could die very easily. So,
Yes.
what are two kind of games, just to balance the scales, that this system would not be good for? Like, what two aspects in the world of RPGs, which is infinite, would you say this doesn't handle well?
I don't think it handles epic fantasy very well. I think
Okay.
a lot of people early on had read Lord of the Rings and seen Star Wars, and that was during this same era. So people were trying to use it to storm into the Dark Lord's manor and fight off, giant monsters, and you would be killed almost immediately for that. It really did not work for that type of thing. It's really based on playing amoral characters trying to get rich. So it does not do epic fantasy very well. Um, I'd say it doesn't offer any actual support for intrigue, but it also doesn't stop you from doing intrigue. Like, you can certainly role play anything with the system
Oh, yeah.
because there's no rules getting in the way. There are no rules for social interaction. Your charisma
Okay.
score helps with reactions when you meet a monster, and it helps with loyalty if you hire retainers to work for you.
Okay.
But there aren't any actual rules for trying to deceive or persuade or perform. Those are not things that the designers even thought about.
Okay.
So if you're playing a bunch of nobles trying to ingratiate themselves with the Lord, it's basically all just role playing.
Okay, that can have its advantages and disadvantages, but for a game that would solely focus on intrigue and social development, there's not a whole lot of meat in the system for that.
Yeah, you might as well just be playing with a piece of paper that has your name on it in that case.
All right. You seem like you have a lot of experience in the system. Does it work outside of genre? Like, if we took away the fantasy tropes and everything and put sci-fi or modern day, would the system hold up, or is it really entrenched in the gritty fantasy setting?
There are actually a lot of hacks out there for sci-fi. I think, and I can't name any off the top of my head, but I know there are some sci-fi games out there that just replace the weapons with lasers and the monsters with aliens and things. I think it can handle any genre as far as the actual trappings of what kind of monsters and weapons and setting you have, but it's really confined to a certain type of game, which is the go somewhere, find a dungeon or a hole in the ground, go down and try to acquire something. You can change the gold pieces into space crystals and the crossbow into a blaster. But if your the main idea of the game is going to be is really always going to be the same. It's about acquisition of wealth and knowledge and power.
All right.
So yes, it can handle other genres, but it really, I guess, depends on what you mean by genre. If it's setting, yes. If it's what you're doing in the game, it really is confined to that one activity.
Okay, by genre I meant the tropes that tend to follow them. So, like, it wouldn't handle slice life overly well, but it would handle space exploration or dealing with wreckages and stuff like that quite easily. Okay.
Yeah, I know there are several games that do that.
All right, so as long as it's the characters trying to accumulate wealth and power through risk and having a very close to realistic, gritty feel to it. Okay.
Yes.
Well, I think we've accomplished what we set out to do today. We've taught people how to make a character in this system. We've gone over the strengths and weaknesses of using the system. So I'm just going to remind the audience, I'm Matthew, OnlyWolf2000 on most forums or Discords if you find me. I am a paid GM at startplaying.com. And our guest today, John, can give his own farewell.
I'm Josh Irvin. Run Ironic Hero Games. It's all right. They're very close together. And I'm also a GM at startplaying.games. I've also got some products at Drive-Thru RPG at Ironic Hero Games as well. Some for free, some for money. And that's me. I look forward to playing with anyone who is interested.
Yeah, just one question about the products. What systems are they for? Are they one we did today, or are they for other ones?
I actually have a free hack of this game called Badass Basic, which actually takes this, simplifies it slightly more, and makes it far less gritty, ups the hit points, makes the saving throws easier to survive. Basically, I tried to take a modern survivability approach, but with the same simplicity of rules and the same underlying foundation. I've got a bunch of other games. I've got a dungeon world hack. I have a new product called Stupid Dungeon Tricks, which is a series I'm creating that is just individual ideas for dungeon crawling adventures, traps, rooms, puzzles, little $1 PDFs that you can purchase that just give you an idea for one room in a dungeon or one puzzle in a dungeon. So you can check those out at Ironic Hero Games at Drive-Thru RPG.
Yeah, those sound excellent. If you're short on time, you need to get a quick filler, you could just pick that up and throw it right in your campaign.
Yeah, it's just inspiration for those who don't have the time to think about something.
Fair. All right, well, thank you for coming out, Josh. And we will speak again, probably. This has been excellent.
Hope
Thank
so.
you.
Thank you.